All right, everybody. Yet another story arc has concluded in One Piece. Egghead is officially in the books, and you know what that means. Another island has been added to the catalog. All islands will be cataloged. All islands will be discussed because geography is everything! Go to the intro! Okay, Egghead Island, the island of the future, the home of the future city, where the smartest man in the world does science from the future, 500 years in the future. Can you even imagine what the world's gonna look like in 500 years? Actually, maybe not a great idea to think about what the world's gonna look like in 500 years. I'm sure we're gonna have hoverboards and we'll be flying around in fancy cars and all that kind of nonsense. Honestly, this is something, because a lot of what Egghead is based off of is like the way that people viewed the future like way back in the 50s. People are thinking we're gonna have spaceships like the rockets, you know, like the cartoony rockets that go to the moon. We did go to the moon, that did happen. Haven't really been back in a while, but you know, it happened. You know, we don't really have flying cars, which is honestly probably a good thing. I want you to think about this for a serious second. I don't know if you live in an area where you have to drive a car around a lot. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. You might live in a city or something, but if you live in an area where you got to drive a vehicle, and you know, there's people that aren't the greatest drivers, there's some people that are straight up crap drivers. Now imagine they all have their own personal mini helicopter and everybody's flying around through the sky. That doesn't sound like a good idea to me. That doesn't sound like a great idea. Probably a good thing we don't have flying cars zipping around all over the place, honestly. Hoverboards, though. I liked Back to the Future Part 2. I would go for a hoverboard. Yeah, sure. You know, better than those ones that we have now that you just have to kind of like balance on and you move forward. And I don't know what those things are, but those are not hoverboards, okay? But on Egghead Island, all of this and more is possible. Also, giant holograms of Godzilla are stomping around, because why not? Vegapunk isn't really so much the practical kind of scientist. He's more of like the cool entertainment aspect of science. Like, there's really no practical purpose to have a giant hologram dinosaur fighting a giant hologram robot in the middle of your future city. It just looks cool, and you can do it, so why not, right? Okay. So, let's start by just talking about the area around Egghead before we get into the actual island, because Vegapunk has really screwed around with the already tumultuous weather in the Grand Line. Vegapunk looked at the Grand Line, and people were talking about how, oh, the weather is unpredictable, you can't do anything about it. Vegapunk just cracked his knuckles and was like, bet, and he goes and he messes with it, all right, with science. So Egghead Island was originally just an ordinary winter island in the New World. Vegapunk's original place of operations was Punk Hazard way back at the beginning of the New World. Straw Hats went there a long time ago, and Caesar messed up, set off a nuke. The whole place was wiped out. Akainu and Aokiji have their big fight there. That results in half the island being ice, half the island being magma. But you know, that's where that was. Okay, so after that whole thing happened, Vegapunk needed a new base of operations, so he goes to this random island, which I guess was uninhabited and probably just owned by the world government. It's like, yeah, you can have this place. He set up a place called Laboratory Number 8, which was the original Egghead. It was just a very simple lab, very similar to Punk Hazard, and then he slowly built that up over the course of only 4 years, because the disaster on Punk Hazard when Caesar set off the nuke, yeah, that was only 4 years ago before the current storyline, so Vegapunk was able to build every single thing you see in the Egghead arc in just 4 years. Very impressive. One of such things was the Island Aircon system, or the Island AC. So every time Vegapunk just wants to, hey, you know what, I've had enough of living on a winter island, I want to live on a tropical summer island. He just goes over to the little thermostat on the wall and just dials it to summer, and then the entire island's climate just shifts. In fact, there's a lot of machines like Vegaforce 1 that can only operate inside of the unique climate of Egghead. That was kind of the reason why they couldn't just pick up the Sunny with Vegaforce 1 and just fly away. Let's just pick up, like, we have a giant robot, like a giant robot. It's so big it can literally pick up the Sunny, which is already a pretty big ship, in its hands. Just pick up the Vegaforce 1 and just rock it off to the next island. Yeah, no, we can't do that. Why can't we? Oh, well, the robot only works in the climate of Egghead. Like, okay, all right, I see that. But, hey, that's how it goes, right? Now, the side effect of that is when you take a winter island and force it to a tropical rainforest island, that kind of messes up the surrounding area, because remember, when you're navigating the Grand Line, especially in the New World, when you're going in between islands, that's when the weather is the most insane. Like, you have one island that is, like, let's say a summer island, and then another island that's a winter island. The area, the ocean in between, is just going to be absolutely chaotic, and it still very much is. Outside of Egghead, it is still very, very cold. There was an intense blizzard when the Straw Hats were approaching, and there was a thing called a warm eddy, where all of the heat that's, being created from Egghead itself is causing these ocean currents that, like, sprout up out of the water like a giant, like, geyser or something, right? And that's where the Straw Hats run into Bonnie and everything. Also, Egghead has a very great security force. The security fence surrounding the island is pretty good. It's a bunch of mechanical sea beasts, which I don't even imagine, like, the process of how that went down, where Vegapunk was like, I have an idea for a security force. Capture a bunch of the sea giraffes and the sea bears, and then we'll modify them. We'll make them better, stronger. We'll make them be able to fire lasers. Once again, Vegapunk is not a malicious guy. He's just very curious, he embodies the scientific purpose, and he just wants to make cool shit. Whether or not that cool shit can be weaponized to kill innocent civilians, yeah, that doesn't really come up so often. It's more about just making... Hey, look, if you had the ability to take a sea bear and modify it to shoot rockets, would you not do this, sir or madam? I think you shall, right? Okay, so that's what he did. So he took, like, a sea reindeer and a sea badger and a sea bulldog, I think. Then a mechanical shark. He took a shark and made that, like almost entirely robotic. And that's what the Straw Hats first run into, this giant mechanical shark that's just about to eat the Sunny. Another very important thing that actually comes up later when we're talking about Kuma is that even though they modified all of these animals with cybernetics, Lilith explicitly mentions that it's very difficult to remove the innate primal nature and instinct of those animals. So even though the mechanical shark has, like, computers and stuff in its brain and is supposed to be able to be controlled, like, don't eat the ship, the shark will still be able to override that with its natural instinct and tries to eat the Sunny, right? So that's very important when we find out, like, with Kuma and everything later, even though he's had his brain wiped, he's still able to have that, like, fatherly protection instinct for Bonnie, okay? So that's the outside of the island. It's pretty intense, pretty cold, and swarming with sea monsters, which provides decent protection for the island. So getting on to Egghead itself, there are two main sections, so not really much. I mean, there's more subsections to that, but two main sections of the island. We have the Fabriophase, or the fabrication sphere, where the port is and the city and everything, and then you have the Labophase, or the Labosphere, which is on top of the island, floating on island cloud that is produced in the Fabriophase, okay? So, pretty neat, pretty nifty kind of setup. There's nothing, especially coming out of Wano, because Wano, we had, like, a bunch of different regions of Wano and things that you had to remember and everything like that. I think Oda maybe wanted to keep it a little bit more simplistic when we got to Egghead. Just like, there's the Fabriophase, there's the Labophase, there's other places too, like Punk Records, but, that's just what it is, okay? So let's start with the Fabriophase first. This is very much the place where Atomic Punk reigns supreme, okay? All of the buildings have weird designs. There's scientists that come all over the world to study on Egghead, and they have a variety of different subjects. There's geologists, there's geographers, there's mathematicians, there's the most innocent form of science, which is the study of birds, ornithology, or I know it starts with an O. All right, they're there, they're just, every scientist that just wants to study simple things about the world. Entomologists are there, etymologists are there, everybody is there just to study science. Now, when they do arrive, I guess they all have to have a specific uniform, because they're all dressing like they're an Astro Boy from, like, the 1960s. But once again, there's an aesthetic on the island. You got to keep up with that, okay? So there's a big science city. It obviously would have barracks and apartments and places for the scientists to live and big factories for them to work. We don't see every little detail of the fabrication phase, but we know of a few locations. We know that there is a factory that all of the Pacifista Mark IIIs are stored. There's at least 50 of those, and that's where Sentomaru went in and, pulled the switch and activated all the Mark IIIs to defend the island further. These are the upgraded forms of the Pacifista. I did a video about them a long time ago, but those were the prototypes. These are the Mark IIIs with the new bubble shield technology, and they can fire better lasers. There's also Pacifistas that are modeled to be like police. Kuma walking around that was going to arrest Luffy and everybody. I'm assuming there's a police station for that reason. I'm not really sure how that whole process works on Egghead, but it is there. There's also the vending machines, so I guess that's actually pretty cool that Vegapunk just makes that stuff available for any scientist. If you're a scientist and you're on the go, if you're a botanist and you're on the go, you gotta study plants and you're going to work, it's man, I really wish I could have a triple baconator right now, or I want to have a nice warm bowl of pasta, or I want some tacos. You could just stop over at any of the vending machines and just beep, boop, beep, beep, boop, boop, beep, tacos. All right, now back to botany, and then there you go. And that's pretty handy. I kind of want to try that vending machine. I really do. The vending machine is what was the one thing you would try when you get to Egghead first? Vending machine for me, definitely. And there's different buttons for north, south, east, west, blue, different kinds of cuisine you can order. It's a really cool kind of machine. There's the scrapyard, which is kind of hidden. There's a bunch of different holographic buildings and walls. Not all the buildings are real. That's the thing. This place was only built 4 years ago, so maybe Vegapunk was filling out some of the city with holograms so it looks bigger than it actually was, because now that I think about it, we didn't really see that. I mean, we did see a lot of buildings get destroyed when the Gorosei attack, so a lot of them are real, but I wouldn't be surprised if Vegapunk filled out the city with holograms until he eventually got it all built up the way he wanted it to be. So there's a lot of fake buildings and alleyways that lead to walls that are just holograms that you can phase through, and navigating that, you eventually come to the scrap heap, and this is where Vegapunk dumps all of his inventions that did not meet his standards. We find out Vegapunk has very high standards, so a lot of this stuff is actually fully functional. There's a lightsaber in here. There's just an actual legit lightsaber, and the only problem with it was it attracts bugs too much. So, I don't know. That would be kind of funny, though, going back to watch, Attack of the Clones or something, and then, they pull out the lightsabers and then just get swarmed by a bunch of bugs. That'd be interesting. I don't know why I picked Attack of the Clones. I didn't watch much of Attack of the Clones. I barely made it through Phantom Menace. I watched maybe half of Attack of the Clones, and I watched Revenge of the Sith. I watched that in the theaters, actually. That was the first Star Wars movie I ever saw, really. Yeah, my Star Wars history is really scattered all over the place. I watched 3, and then 4, 5, 6, and then 1 and 2. And I haven't seen the Disney ones yet, which, according to a lot of people, it's good, don't. It's okay. But anyway, yeah, perfectly functional lightsaber in the junk heap, along with a bunch of other really good inventions, and the iron left over from the Void Century. Not going to spend a lot of time on Emmet, because there's other videos for that, and that's not really the focus of geography, but Emmet is big enough that he qualifies as geography, I would say. Luffy and Chopper climbed up on him, so he counts. He counts as geography. But yeah, Iron Giant there from the Void Century, that used to be Joy Boy's best friend. That's also there, right there. Let's see, we have the Recycle Wand. The Recycle Wand is this little robot. I'm imagining there's multiple of these, but we only saw one of them. Little scrap robot that just eats trash and then poops out metal cubes or whatever to be reused. It's a recycling robot. Pretty neat. We have the Cloud Factory, which is kind of the epicenter of the city. It's a big wine bottle shaped building, and out of the top of the bottle is where the island cloud, so the pyrobrine, is the chemical that is actually taken from sea prism, and it congeals together. It coalesces in the sky, forming the island clouds that Skypiea and Upper Yard reside on and everything like that, right? So Vegapunk figured out a way to synthesize these clouds, and this is how he supports the Labophase, okay? It's also very, very important for the end of the arc when finally the Labophase, or Punk Records specifically, breaks away from that and begins to float around. And so Vegapunk has a bunch of different access to different types of clouds. He uses a roaming cloud to separate Punk Records to allow it to flow freely around the world, right? There is the vacuum rocket. This is like a quick express way to get up to the Labophase. I imagine the Labophase is like only certain personnel are allowed up there. I don't think any random, etymologist is allowed to just get into the vacuum rocket and fly up to the Labophase. This is where serious science goes on. Well, no, seriously. I mean, this is where the Mother Flame resides, the power plant. Also, Vegapunk's brain, which he probably doesn't want more people poking around than necessary. So I imagine like some of the scientists are maybe allowed up there, but only for like the real serious kind of science. You know what I'm talking about, right? Yes, absolutely. What, making the newest flavor of soda. It's like, I will make a new kind of Mountain Dew. That's the kind of science that goes on in the Labophase. Changing rooms are abundant. Same thing with the vending machines, I guess. See, like, when Luffy and Chopper and Jinbei were using the changing rooms and eating the food in the vending machines, that's when the police officer Kuma showed up and was like, hey, halt, criminals, halt, you have stolen goods, So I don't know if, like, each of the scientists have like a certain number of like credits, or like they have a card or something where you go and they have like Apple Pay or something. They go into the changing room and it like scans them. Because like, I'm just saying, like the way Vegapunk programmed these machines, you can just walk into the changing room, push a button, and it gives you an outfit. It didn't scan Luffy for a QR code or like is like, you do not have any money, you do not have any credits, you are not getting any clothing. No, he just got the clothing. You just push buttons and you get food. So I don't know, Vegapunk. I mean, you got to install like a little like a POS machine or something. Like you got to do something here, okay? If you want people to pay for the goods. Otherwise, why was Policeman Kuma chasing after them, right? I still love Jinbei's outfit in this arc. Jinbei's like dad Hawaiian shirt and cargo pants, just like walking around at like taking your kids to an amusement park. Luffy and Chopper jumping around. That was pretty funny. Let's see. And then other than that, you just have like a bunch of holograms and stuff. A lot of Egghead gets completely wrecked by the Gorosei when they attack, and then a fire starts, and then Emmett is stomping around. So the fabrication phase is pretty much just completely obliterated at this point. And it's in control of the government. The world government has it right now. Punk Records floated away, but they still have access to some of the Labophase, and they have access to but they still have access to some of Labophase that's left behind, and they also have access to all the fabrication phase, but a lot of that is destroyed. So I don't know. The government and the Marines will probably like put out the fires and things, but like what's remaining of that is probably not going to be that much. It's going to be probably very, very few things that survived all of that destruction, right? But now we get to the Labophase, which is where a good chunk of the arc took place and all the really, really cool science shit is located, all right? So, on top of that building that I mentioned, the Cloud Factory, there's just a little plume of smoke or a plume of cloud that goes all the way up, and then it billows out into this giant island cloud that's looming over the top of Egghead. And it's several times larger than the Labophase, like the actual labs itself that are on there. I imagine Vegapunk planned on like putting a lot more stuff on the Labophase, because the Labophase was not there like a few years ago. Like when Kuma was there to meet with Vegapunk and do like the memory wiping and everything like that, you don't see the Labophase yet. It's just the fabrication phase. Like he had yet to build it. So I imagine the Labophase and Punk Records, like the giant egg and everything like that, that's relatively new. Like within the last year or so is probably when Vegapunk really built that. And so the lab itself is really not that big compared to the size of the island cloud. So along the circumference of the cloud, there are these two lines that stretch around the entire cloud, like holographic lines. And there is also a number, and this number changes depending on what phase of Egghead we are in. Like when we get there, I think the number is like in the 60s or something like that. This is the number of the protection of the Frontier Dome. So Vegapunk made a badass force field around the entirety of the Labophase to protect it from outside interference. So obviously the main way to get up there is like the express rocket. You could still do that if you have the right clearance and things like that. And if you had access to like a flying machine like Vega Force 1, you can fly up as well. However, if somebody tries to just fly up there without clearance, like let's say they have a Devil Fruit ability that gives them flight, or let's say they're a 6 powers user and they have Geppo, which is, the skywalk that Sanji uses, jumping up like Kaku tried to, they get nuked by the security lasers. So how it works is there's like a perimeter with the grid, like it's an entire grid, and it's like a motion sensor, and if you pass the motion sensor, you just get bombarded with lasers from the Frontier Dome, and they're depending on the number on the side of the cloud, that's how strong the lasers are going to be. From a light stun that's just like a warning shot to just completely incinerated, all right? Now, if you're strong enough, you can kind of just push through that. Luffy got knocked through it twice while in Gear 5th, and that was at 100% power, and he was able to get back through it. Marcus Mars, when he was in his Itsumade yokai form, was able just to break right through it. So, and they have healing abilities and things like that. So, it isn't a foolproof defense. Also, Kizaru is able to cheat his way right through it because lasers, turns out, are made of light. Kizaru is also made of light, so he was able to just to zip right through with like zero problems whatsoever. So, it's not a flawless defense system, considering we're living in the world of like Devil Fruit powers and Logias and things like that, and hockey exists. But it is a pretty efficient, like Kaku certainly, I think, thinks it was a good security measure. You know, when Kaku got nuked, I felt like he was like, yeah, that's smart. That hurts a bit, right? So in order to get in, you have to like turn off the Frontier Dome first, and you can only do that from the control room, which is inside of the lab, okay? So getting into the lab itself, as the name implies, the name of the island is Egghead, so there's a giant egg on top of the island cloud, and that egg is like cracked open like this, and the lab is nestled in the bottom half of the egg, and then the top half of the egg is Punk Records, where Vegapunk has stored his brain, and he eventually hopes to invent the internet or something, but that was put on hold for a while, considering the events of the arc, right? Okay. So, the lab, I didn't even really notice this when I saw it in the manga. I didn't realize this until the anime started showing a bunch of different shots of it, but the lab, as like the control room and the 3 buildings and everything, it's like a stereo setup. It's like an old school stereo setup that like my dad had back in the 90s. You know, it's like the center console where you'd put in like your cassettes and your 8-track tapes and your CDs and your records. My dad even had one. It was like a really cool combination one that played cassettes, CDs, 8 tracks, and a record player on top. It was like the coolest thing ever, and had like giant speakers off to the side. That's what the lab looks like, okay? So there's 3 main buildings, cleverly named Building A in the center, Building B, and then Building C. We don't see every floor of every single building, but when the Straw Hats, they spread out to go find Vegapunk, and they try to find Bonnie, they're looking around. So we see a couple of different floors, and then some are mentioned, like what is there, but we don't see all of them, right? So Building A is the center building. That's the one we spend a lot of time in. That's the one where on the 4th floor, that's the control room. That's where Luffy and Zoro fought against and I guess Lucci and Kaku as well, fought against the Seraphim, fought against S-Hawk and S-Bear, and then also S-Hawk sliced like a big chunk out of the top of it off, so a lot of damage was incurred as well. And then also in Building A, there's the basement level, which is the old Devil Fruit Research Lab. There's also a prison down there, like the little prison tubes where Vegapunk was imprisoned by York. This is where Shaka got shot. Also, all the Cypher Pole agents were imprisoned down there as well. That entire area was sliced up when Ethan turned into his centaur form, sliced it open, and all the Seraphim that were imprisoned there and the Cypher Pole agents fell out, so they're, back in the Marines' hands right now. The second floor of Building A, we never find out what the first floor is. I'm imagining the first floor was like the mezzanine. It's like the lobby. We never see the lobby of Building A, unfortunately. But the second floor is where the organoids are. The organoids, I know they sound like aliens, but no, like they're actual organs, like synthetic organs, like a kidney or a heart, which is really useful for medical research. I remember a lot of people, like, I don't know if Oda did this intentionally or not, but like a lot of the red herrings that are spread throughout of Egghead, like Egghead gets stabbed and really injured and he loses a lot of his internal organs. It's like, oh, well, we have all these synthetic organs in the lab, so that's what's going to save the Stella. And it's like, nah, didn't really end up working out that way, but it was an interesting little, showcase of the science that goes on there. And then the third floor of Building A is where synthetic minerals are made. So this is the, area where Nami was walking around and she was losing herself over all of the giant pile of diamonds and everything. Diamonds, if you've ever seen Dr. Stone, are very important for science because you can cut things with them and everything like that. Very important materials to have. So synthetic diamonds and other minerals are created in this laboratory here. And so that's Building A. Building B is where the power plant is. So the first level of Building B is where the Mother Flame is housed, which is, it's definitely more fantastical because it's a manga, but loosely based on nuclear fusion. So you have like an internal flame that never goes out, that's in some kind of liquid, apparently maybe to keep the heat of it radiating in check, that's inside of this giant reinforced steel like bulwark, okay? And there's like this little porthole that you can look inside, like this reinforced glass, I'm sure, that has the mother flame bubbling in there. And so this is the closest thing to like nuclear power that we have in the One Piece world. And this is the console area that like Saturn was smashing trying to find the Den Mushi. But unfortunately, the Mother Flame, it's still in the possession of York and the government, because that was not one of the buildings that escaped. It was only Punk Records, the top part of the egg, and Vegapunk's brain that escaped. So the Mother Flame is still in the possession of the government. I don't know what they're going to do with it, but it's probably not going to involve a birthday party. It's probably not going to involve like Eam being like, I shall have a birthday party now. And it's like, oh, okay, here's the Mother Flame. It's like, oh, you shouldn't have. Thank you so much, Top Man. Everybody, Top Man is my favorite Gorosei this month. And Top Man is like, oh, gee shucks. Okay. Yeah, they're probably gonna use it to power an ancient weapon to nuke more islands, so that's not good. The second floor of Building B, I don't think we see this, but it's mentioned to have a lot of weapons. Once again, weapons for peace, not weapons for war. You know, it's like Vegapunk's like, I invented this laser Gatling cannon for peace. The peaceful applications of this giant rocket are immense. Think about all of the peaceful applications that you could make with this giant flamethrower. It shoots fire up to a mile away, and then it explodes, and then the explosion also explodes. More fire. Okay, so, yeah, weapon development. I mean, yeah, that's, you know. Okay, and then we have Building C, where this building, I think, is the place where S-Snake attacked everybody and, you know, turned, like, York to stone and all that stuff. And this is where I think where Pythagoras died as well, or got blown up. This is a place that also houses a lot of gas cylinders. It was mentioned, like, when the Gorosei were, like, you know, screw this, the Den Mushi broadcasting Vegapunk's message, can't we just blow up the entire lab or blow up the entire island? And York was like, no, old guys, no, boomers, you shouldn't do that. Like, if you boomers blow up the island, there's gonna be a big boom, all right? There's gas cylinders and there's everything, like, great, you know, all of the stuff, the Mother Flame, all that stuff's gonna get destroyed if you do that, so please don't, all right? So that was kind of the reason, that was the explanation of why the Gorosei can't just, like, why Mars didn't just fly up to the freaking Labophase and just nuke it with his laser breath, okay? That was the reason. Now, there's a few other locations in the lab that we don't know exactly their location in the buildings, like what building they're in or what floor, but we have the Paw Room. This is the place where Kuma's memories were stored that Bonnie went into, and so she experienced all the memories of Kuma on God Valley and got to meet her mother for the first time properly through Kuma's memories, and so that's that room was. It was heavily protected, but Bonnie was able to get in there with her powers. We also have the Memory Wiping Lab. Remember the Memory Wiping Lab? I don't remember the memory wiping lab. Yeah, once again, I really don't think that last, like, chapter of Egghead, like, the epilogue of Egghead where we had Shaka, Pythagoras, and Vegapunk, like, I don't really think we needed to see that. I don't think we needed to see the background behind all of this. Like, they knew already it was York, and then they had this plan, and then they wiped their memories. Like, I really don't think that was necessary to the arc. I think Oda already had a good story going on. Maybe it was Oda's attempt to, like, cover his bases with everything. Like, I'm not really sure if I forgot everything, so I'm just gonna have Vegapunk wipe his memories. I still feel like it was unnecessary. I mean, it makes sense that he had this. I mean, he also uses it to wipe Kuma's memories as well. So we already knew that he had a memory wiping lab. I just don't think that whole memory wiping plot was necessary. Let me know if you think it was below or not. Yeah, that's pretty much what we got for the lab there. A lot of other areas and stuff, but I feel like that was, like, relatively new, so Vegapunk would have built it up even more if he had time. You can also adjust the size of the cloud from the plant down below like Edison did for having them to escape, right? Then we get to the piece de resistance, the cherry on top of Egghead, or the egg on top of Egghead. We have Punk Records. So it's the top portion of have the egg that is like there's a grid pattern that just says Punk Records across it, and it is the hangar where I would assume not just his brain, but Vegapunk keeps his most fragile and most important inventions are in Punk Records, okay? Because it's the most protected and reinforced location on all of Egghead, all right? So Vegapunk, of course, because he ate the brain fruit, did not give him genius intellect. It just gave him like infinite storage space inside of his brain to store all of his genius intellect. Well, eventually his brain kept getting too big to the point where it was like the size of a giant. So he's like, oh, Quasar, well, only one thing to do about this. He just cuts off his head. Once again, One Piece, don't explain how this works, but, you know, he cuts off the top portion of his head, puts it into a tank, stores it, and then hooks it up with a bunch of devices, and, you know, that's just his brain, just floating in a jar, and then his idea was to eventually link up Punk Records to the entire world to essentially create the internet for people. He was trying to create Wikipedia, basically. Just, I want to have a place where everybody can upload any information that they have all together. Well, wouldn't that be like a lot of fake information or people's biased opinions or like conspiracy theories? No, that'll be fine. You know, there would have to be like a fact-checking program installed in Punk Records. But he didn't quite get to that point where just anybody can upload to Punk Records, only himself, the Stella body of Vegapunk, as well as the 6 satellites. So Shaka, Lilith, Edison, Pythagoras, Atlas, and York. You know, those are the ones that can upload to it. They can also share information, like they can draw from it anywhere in the world, we discovered. So even after Punk Records is separated from Egghead and just wandering around, like about to meet up with Weatheria, you know, that is something that could still be connected from York, no matter where she is in the world. So that's going to be important. We also have seen that the extra body parts of the Vegapunks are also in Punk Records. So, like, we see extra versions of Shaka's heads and legs, and the Vegapunks are now alive there, technically speaking. They don't have their physical bodies anymore, but their consciousness is now still in Vegapunk's brain, as long as the brain survives. So they kind of made themselves a new body, which is like a chimera being of a different parts, like Shaka's legs and Atlas's arm and Pythagoras' other arm and Edison's head, you know, kind of create like an amalgam Vegapunk. And then they're just going to take all the York parts and just throw them out of the freaking sky ship, I guess, and they just land in the ocean or something, right? It's like they just throw York's body out of Punk Records. It's getting eaten by sharks in the freaking ocean, I suppose. Yeah, and then there's, I would assume that, like, because they mentioned that, like, they don't have a lot of resources in Punk Records, so they're not going to be able to really invent anything, and they don't have any resource funds anymore, so, you know, they're just floating around in the sky, and Shaka even laments that, like, yeah, I guess we're just going to have to keep this safe as best as we can until humanity can catch up with us, so that'll be about 5 centuries. So, you know, we're on a roaming cloud. It might last that long, and just hopefully one day that humanity will be able to connect to it. I don't think that'll be a problem. I think by the end of One Piece we'll have that. Like Vegapunk's dream will be realized and everything, because, you know, consciousness still continues while in the brain in the jar. A lot of people have also mentioned, like, so the brain is in, the head is in a jar filled with liquid, which is the weakness of Devil Fruit abilities, right? So how does that go? I would imagine Vegapunk figured out a way to, like, you know, adjust the viscosity. Like, at what point does the liquid sap a Devil Fruit user's strength is the question, right? Because I would imagine, you know, like if you submerge, like, Luffy in, like, yogurt or pudding or gelatin or something like that, I imagine that wouldn't, like, take away the ability. So if it's a liquid that does it, there's got to be a sweet spot of, like, viscosity where it stops being, like, draining the Devil Fruit ability. It could also be some, like, green blood synthetic kind of material. So green blood is another invention that runs inside all of the Seraphim, which allows Vegapunk to take a Paramecia ability and give it to a cloned being, so the Seraphim, right? It doesn't work with Logias, so we now have duplicated Paramecias and duplicated zones that Vegapunk can make, but they work a little differently, like with green blood, and then the zones can just be synthetic Devil Fruits, like Momonosuke's Dragon Zone. Oh, somebody else brought this up. I was reading some comments, and this is actually really scary. So we have the Seraphim, right? Like S-Hawk has the abilities of Daz Bones, and S-Shark has the abilities of Senor Pink, right? However, S Snake and S Bear have the abilities of their Shishibukai counterpart of Boa Hancock and Bartholomew Kuma, right? The Pawpaw Fruit and the Love Fruit, right? Because they used to be warlords, so the government would have their DNA on file, right? Now, Jinbei and Mihawk did not have Devil Fruit abilities. That's why they had to go to Senor Pink and Dazbones, respectively. However, people mentioned Law used to be a warlord, which means it's not impossible that there could be a synthetic green blood version of the Op fruit. And if there isn't yet, if they have Law's blood, York would be able to synthesize that. So York, now that she's working for the government, probably not in the way that she envisioned. She's not going to be a Tenryubito, but, you know, she now has the brains to, like, synthesize green blood. She could synthesize the Op fruit, which is an insanely powerful devil fruit, which brings, like, questions, like, about. So, like the really messed up way of looking at this is, like, could you synthesize the Op fruit multiple times, like 10 times, put it into a clone, have the clone perform the Eternal Youth operation on, like, the Tenryubito or something, and just, like, you know, Seraphim number 7, perform the Eternal Youth operation. Okay. Dies. Seraphim number 2, also loaded up with the green blood. You perform the Eternal Youth operation. Okay. And then just, like, you just keep doing that. If you can synthesize the Op fruit over and over and over and over and over again, these are the questions. These are the questions. Because from what we've seen, there's really no limitation. Like, S-Snake was able to use the effects of the Love fruit, and S-Bear was able to use all of the effects of the Pawpaw fruit. There didn't seem to be, like, a downgraded version of it. Like, Jinbei was able to use the Swim fruit just as effective, if not more effective, than Senor Pink was. It doesn't seem to be like a watered-down version of it, so I guess we'll see how that works. But at any rate, yeah, right now Punk Records is free as a bird and flying around in the skies of the One Piece world. And I think that's pretty much all of the major points of Egghead. So, yeah, Geography is Everything will continue once we conclude Elbaf. You know, there's still a few islands. There's still a few islands that I've yet to discuss, but in terms of the mainline islands, then, yeah, I have to wait until the actual story gets to that point where the island, we've seen everything, and then I can talk about it again. I guess I could do a Geography is Everything on Wiener Island, where Blackbeard fought Law. I guess I could do that, I suppose. But, yeah, at any rate, thanks for watching, everybody. This will be Tekking, signing out. To the future! I'm playing Astrobot right now, and it's such a fun game, you know? It's just a fun platformer. Everybody, all the robots are dancing and having a good time. Astro's just like a nice little, like, oh, he's a robot buddy. He's just like, he reminds me of Edison, really. He's just Edison, honestly. You know, just running around and just, you know, jumping on things. Some of the levels are pretty tough. Some of those, like the circle or triangle levels or whatever, some of those are pretty tough to get through. But it's a fun game. I'm enjoying it. So, yes, go check out Astrobot if you haven't. All right, thanks for watching, everybody. Tekking, signing out.